I still remember the weight of those car keys in my hand. They weren't just keys. They were 23 years of hope, guilt, loyalty, and a decision that would split my family in two. She doesn't deserve it. My younger sister Emma leaned close enough for only me to hear those 5 words. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but somehow it echoed louder than everyone else's applause. I looked at Mum. She was standing outside her semi-detached house in Harrogate, Yorkshire, smiling with tears gathering in her eyes. Our aunties were taking photographs. My uncle was opening another bottle of sparkling wine. The neighbours had already wandered over the garden fence to see what all the excitement was about. Parked on the driveway was the brand new metallic blue Mini Cooper I'd spent nearly a year saving for. Everyone thought they knew why I'd bought it. Nobody knew the real reason, not even Emma. Especially not Mum. I forced a smile and placed the keys into Mum's trembling hands. "You've done enough for us," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. If only that had been true. As cameras flashed around us, Emma turned away. She couldn't even look at us, and if you'd asked anyone standing in that garden, they would have said Emma was being bitter, jealous perhaps. For years, I believed that too. I couldn't have been more wrong. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to my sister before I handed over those keys, because less than 48 hours later, I discovered something that made me question every childhood memory I had of my own family. But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand who my mother really was. Growing up, people adored her. She volunteered at church. She organised charity bake sales. She never forgot a birthday. Our neighbours described her as the kindest woman on the street. She baked Victoria sponge cakes for new families moving into the neighbourhood and knitted tiny blankets for every new baby born within our circle of friends. To everyone else, she was remarkable. To us, she was complicated. I'm Sarah. I'm 33 years old, and until recently, I believed that love meant proving your loyalty over and over again, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. My dad worked long hours as a railway engineer. Most weekdays he left before sunrise and came home long after dinner. That meant Mum ruled the house. Not loudly, not violently, quietly. She had a way of making you feel guilty for wanting anything she hadn't chosen for you. If she sacrificed something, you owed her. If she cried, you apologized. If she was disappointed, somehow it became your fault. The strange thing was, I didn't notice any of this when I was a child. Children don't question the rules they're raised with. They simply believe that's how every family works. Emma didn't. She questioned everything. Even when she was 12, she'd ask, "Why does Sarah always have to say sorry?" I'd roll my eyes and tell her to stop making trouble. Mum would sigh dramatically and say, "One day, you'll understand how difficult it is to be a mother." Emma never accepted that answer. I always did. That's the difference that changed both our lives. And it all began with one rainy afternoon, nearly 18 months before I placed those car keys into Mum's hands. It was a wet Tuesday afternoon in February. The sort of Yorkshire rain that never really pours, but somehow soaks everything anyway. I was driving home from work after another 10-hour shift at the care home where I'd worked since my late 20s. I loved looking after elderly residents, but the job was exhausting. My phone rang through the car speakers. "Mum," I answered immediately. "Hello, Mum." Her voice sounded unusually fragile. "Sarah, my car's failed its MOT." I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Oh no, what's wrong with it?" "The garage says the repairs will cost more than the car's worth." There was a long pause, then came the sentence I had heard in different forms all my life. "I don't know what I'm going to do." She didn't ask for money. She never asked directly. She simply left silence hanging in the air until someone filled it. Usually me. I offered to drive her to the supermarket that evening. She sighed. I hate being a burden. You aren't a burden. I'll manage. You don't have to. Another sigh. I just wish your father was still alive. That sentence always worked. Dad had passed away 4 years earlier after a sudden heart attack, and since then I'd felt responsible for keeping Mum safe. By the time I reached home, I'd already convinced myself that helping her wasn't a choice. It was my duty. When I told my husband Daniel, he listened quietly while making us both a cup of tea. So, what are you thinking? He asked. I could help with the repairs. And if the repairs aren't worth it? I stared into my mug. I don't know. Daniel sat opposite me. You've been saving for a deposit on a bigger house for nearly 3 years. I know. You've sacrificed holidays, weekends away, even replacing your own car. I know. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm not saying don't help her. He paused carefully. I'm asking whether you're helping because you want to, or because you feel you have to. I didn't answer, because I already knew the truth. That evening I drove Mum to do her weekly shopping. She talked about rising prices, council tax, electricity bills, and how lonely the house felt without Dad. I listened. Then she stopped outside the local Mini dealership. They're lovely, aren't they? She smiled through the passenger window. I've always wanted another Mini. It sounded like an innocent comment. Now I know it wasn't. A week later, Emma came over for Sunday lunch. She arrived carrying a homemade apple crumble and her usual blunt honesty. After Mum left the room to answer the phone, Emma looked straight at me. You're thinking about buying her a car, aren't you? I nearly dropped my fork. Who told you that? No one. You've got that look. What look? The one you always have before you rescue her. I laughed awkwardly. Don't be ridiculous. Emma didn't smile. Sarah, when was the last time Mum sacrificed something for you? I opened my mouth and realised I couldn't think of a single example. Before I could answer, Mum walked back into the dining room as though nothing had happened. The conversation ended, but Emma's question didn't. It followed me for weeks. And then something happened in Mum's loft that should have stopped me from buying that Mini altogether. Instead, I ignored it. 3 days later, Mum asked if I could help clear out the loft. There are boxes your father never got round to sorting, she said. I can't manage the ladder on my own. It sounded simple enough. So on Saturday morning, I drove over with Daniel. A pair of work gloves, and absolutely no idea that a dusty cardboard box would change the way I saw my entire childhood. The loft smelled of old timber and insulation. Christmas decorations were stacked against one wall. There were faded suitcases, camping gear we hadn't used in years, and dozens of photo albums covered in a thin layer of dust. Mum stayed downstairs, making tea, while Daniel and I carried boxes towards the loft hatch. Halfway through the afternoon, I found a brown storage box tucked behind an old wardrobe. Written across the lid in Dad's handwriting were 4 words, Sarah and Emma, keep. I smiled. Found another memory box, I called down. Mum's reply came far too quickly. Leave that one. I frowned. What? Just leave it. It's only old paperwork. Something in her voice stopped me. Not anger, panic. Daniel noticed it too. He looked at me, but said nothing. After another hour, we packed everything into the garage. As I picked up the brown box again, Mum walked over much faster than I'd seen her move in years. I said leave it. She almost snatched it from my hands. Then she laughed awkwardly. Oh, honestly, your father's filing system was dreadful. She carried the box inside herself. I watched her disappear through the kitchen door. For reasons I couldn't explain, my stomach tightened. That evening, Daniel broke the silence during dinner. "Did you notice how protective she was over that box?" I shrugged. "It probably contains bank statements or something." "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. A week later, Emma rang me. "I need to show you something." Her voice was unusually serious. "What is it?" "Can you come to mine after work?" When I arrived, she didn't waste time with small talk. She placed an old photograph on the coffee table. I recognized it immediately. It was Dad standing beside his first company car outside York railway station. I must have been about 8. Emma was 5. "What about it?" I asked. She pointed to the back of the photograph. There, in Dad's handwriting, was a short note. "For the girls equally. Always equally." I smiled. "That's sweet." Emma looked at me with genuine sadness. "No, Sarah." She stood up and disappeared into another room before returning with a thin blue folder. "I've been finding things like this for months." Inside were birthday cards, letters, old receipts, savings account slips. Everything had one thing in common. Dad had always divided everything equally between us. Pocket money, Christmas presents, savings, school expenses. Every single note ended with words like, "equal," "both girls," "the same." I felt confused. "Why are you showing me this?" Emma took a deep breath. "Because that's not how we grew up." I opened my mouth to argue. But before I could, memories I'd never questioned began replaying in my mind. The birthdays where my presents somehow seemed smaller. The university fund that had mysteriously run out. The countless times Mum had said, "Emma doesn't need as much as you do," or "Your sister understands." I had accepted every explanation without thinking twice. Emma hadn't. She reached into the folder one final time. "This is why I asked you to come." She slid a folded letter across the table. It hadn't been written by Mum. It hadn't even been written by Dad. It was from our family solicitor, and the date on the top of the page was just 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. As I unfolded it, my hands started to shake, because before I'd even finished the first paragraph, I realized someone in my family had been lying to us for years, and if what I was reading was true, buying Mum that mini would become the biggest mistake of my life. I drove home with the solicitor's letter sitting on the passenger seat. I must have glanced at it a dozen times at traffic lights, but I couldn't bring myself to read past the first page again. It felt impossible. My mother couldn't have hidden something this important from us. Could she? When I pulled onto our drive, Daniel was already waiting by the front door. One look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. What happened? I handed him the letter without saying a word. He read it silently. Then he read it again. Finally, he looked up. "This changes everything." According to the solicitor, Dad's will had instructed that a savings account, created years before his death, was to remain untouched until both Emma and I reached the age of 30. The money wasn't enormous, just under £60,000. But that wasn't the point. The point was that neither of us had ever been told the account existed. Instead, after Dad died, Mum had repeatedly insisted there was very little left once the mortgage and funeral expenses had been paid. I'd believed her. Emma never had. "I asked the solicitor for copies," she said, later that evening over the phone. "They couldn't release everything without proof of identity, but they confirmed enough." I sat in complete silence. "Sarah?" "I don't understand." "Neither did I. At first." She paused. Then I started comparing dates. "What dates?" "The dates Mum kept asking you for money." The words hit me like icy water. My mind immediately started joining dots I'd never noticed before. The £2,000 I'd given her when the boiler suddenly failed. The £4,500 I'd transferred after she claimed the roof was unsafe. The weekends I'd cancelled because she couldn't cope alone. The countless little emergencies, each one had felt genuine. Each one had felt urgent. Daniel quietly opened our online banking app. "You kept records," he reminded me. Within half an hour, we'd calculated the figure. Over the last 4 years, I'd transferred Mum just over £28,000. I stared at the total. "I thought I was helping." Daniel didn't answer. He simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For the first time in years, I wondered whether I'd actually been funding a lie. The following morning, I rang Mum. "I've been speaking to Emma." A brief silence. "Oh?" "She found Dad's solicitor." Another silence, longer this time. "I see. There was a savings account." "It wasn't important." "It wasn't important. It wasn't enough to make any difference." I took a slow breath. "Then why didn't you tell us?" Her tone hardened almost instantly. "Because your father never understood how expensive life really was." "So, where did the money go?" "I used it." The answer came so casually that I thought I'd misheard. "You used it?" "I was raising 2 daughters on my own." "You weren't on your own. I was after your father died." "Mum, I deserved some security after everything I'd sacrificed." The conversation had shifted. This was no longer about the money. It was about entitlement. I closed my eyes. "Did you ever intend to tell us?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked a question of her own. "Are you still coming to the dealership on Friday?" The dealership, the Mini, the surprise I'd spent nearly 12 months planning. My throat tightened. Everything inside me screamed to cancel it, to tell her the truth, to confront her, to walk away. But another part of me, the little girl who'd spent her entire life trying to earn her mother's approval, still wanted to believe there had to be an explanation. So I said the one word that would haunt me for weeks. "Yes." Friday arrived under clear, blue Yorkshire skies. The sales advisor handed me the presentation box containing the keys. Family members began arriving one by one. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was laughing. Emma stood slightly apart from the group, her arms folded tightly across her chest. As I walked towards Mum with the keys in my hand, Emma caught my arm. She leaned close enough that nobody else could hear. Her eyes were already filling with tears. Then she whispered the words that had echoed in my mind ever since. "She doesn't deserve it." I looked from my sister to my mother, and in that single moment, I had to decide whether I was about to reward a lifetime of manipulation or finally break the cycle that had controlled our family for decades. I wish I could tell you that I found the courage to walk away. I didn't. I smiled for the photographs. I hugged Mum. I even watched her slide into the driver's seat of the Mini with the excitement of a child on Christmas morning. Everyone clapped as she started the engine. She wound down the window, laughing. I've never owned a brand new car before. The neighbours applauded. My aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Someone handed Mum a bouquet of flowers. It looked like the perfect family celebration. But all I could hear was Emma's voice. "She doesn't deserve it." She left barely 10 minutes later. No goodbye, no argument. She simply picked up her handbag, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For what's coming." Before I could ask what she meant, she'd already climbed into her car. 2 days later, my phone rang just after 7 in the morning. It was Mum. She was crying. "The police are here." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "They're asking questions about your father's estate." I froze. "What?" "They've had Some sort of complaint? I didn't answer because I already knew exactly who had contacted them. Emma, not to get Mum arrested, not out of revenge. She'd reported concerns after the solicitor advised her there might have been a breach of legal duties relating to Dad's estate. The investigation wasn't criminal, it was civil, but it meant someone independent was finally looking at documents that neither of us had ever been allowed to see. Over the following month, everything unravelled. Bank statements, old correspondence, account transfers. The story Mum had told us for years slowly fell apart. The savings Dad had left hadn't disappeared overnight. They'd been spent gradually. Some had gone towards genuine household expenses, but a significant amount had funded holidays we'd never knew about. Private purchases, luxury furniture, designer handbags, even the deposit on the conservatory she'd proudly shown off years earlier. The same conservatory she'd once claimed had been paid for with an insurance payout. It hadn't. I remember sitting in complete silence as each new document arrived. Not because of the money, because every document destroyed another memory I'd trusted. The hardest part wasn't discovering Mum had taken what Dad intended for both of us. It was realizing she'd watched me work double shifts, accept overtime every Christmas, cancel holidays with Daniel, and drain my savings to help her, while knowing she had never been honest with me. One evening, I drove to Emma's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. Neither of us spoke. We simply hugged each other. For a long time. Eventually I whispered, "You tried to tell me." She nodded. "I wasn't trying to turn you against Mum. I know. I was trying to save you." Those words broke something inside me, because she was right. All those years I'd mistaken obedience for love, loyalty for responsibility, sacrifice for kindness. She simply cried, real tears. Not the tears I'd grown up fearing, just the tears of someone finally facing the consequences of her own choices. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She admitted more than I ever expected. Not everything. Probably never everything. But enough. Enough for me to understand something I'd spent years getting wrong. My mother hadn't manipulated us because she was evil. She'd manipulated us because she'd convinced herself she deserved more than everyone else. Understanding that didn't excuse what she'd done, but it allowed me to stop carrying her decisions as if they were my responsibility. A month later, I sold the Mini. The dealership offered a fair price considering its condition. I lost money. Quite a lot, actually. People told me I was foolish. Maybe they were right. But every time I looked at that car, I didn't see generosity anymore. I saw guilt, and I was finished paying for guilt. The money I recovered didn't replace everything I'd lost. Nothing could. Instead, Daniel and I finally used what remained of our savings to put down the deposit on our own home. Nothing extravagant. Just a modest 3-bedroom house with a tiny back garden. The day we collected the keys, Emma stood beside me. She smiled and said, "Dad would have loved this." I smiled back. I think he already does. Sometimes people ask whether Mum is still part of my life. The answer is yes. But the relationship is different now. I visit because I choose to. Not because I feel trapped by obligation, and every time I leave I remind myself of the lesson it took 33 years to learn. Real love doesn't demand endless sacrifice. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't survive on guilt. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is hand back the weight you've been carrying for someone else. Because the greatest gift I ever gave my mother wasn't a brand new car. It was the day I finally stopped trying to earn the love that should have been freely given all along. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. For years, I thought loving someone meant constantly proving my worth to them. I believed that saying yes made me a good daughter, that sacrificing my own happiness was simply part of loving my family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself for ignoring the truth for so long. If my story reminded you of someone in your own life, I hope you remember this. You can love someone without allowing them to control your life, and setting healthy boundaries doesn't make you cruel. Sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself. Now, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. If you had been standing where I was, with those car keys in your hand, would you still have given Mum the car, or would you have walked away? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read as many of your thoughts as I can, and your perspective might help someone else who's silently carrying the same burden. And if stories about family, difficult choices, hidden truths, and emotional journeys resonate with you, I'd love for you to join me for the next one. Because sometimes the stories that change our lives begin with a single decision that nobody else understands.